For much of recorded history, mankind has been fascinated with flight. Countless inventors built their own concepts of heavier-than-air flying machines before the Wright brothers' historic flight in 1903. It did not take long before people became interested in replacing humans at the controls of these early aircraft. In 1916, A.M. Lowe began working on what he called a powered aerial target. While his work failed, as technology wasn't advanced enough at the time, the desire to replace humans at the controls never died. During World War I, technology for pilotless aircraft jumped forward and spawned the Hewitt-Sperry automatic airplane, an early precursor to the modern cruise missile. The first effective and reliable model of remote-controlled aircraft was developed by British airplane fanatic Reginald Denny in 1935. Called the Radioplane OQ-2, its engine produced just 3 pounds of thrust, but it still had enough power to make vertical climbs. In World War II, these small aircraft were in high demand for training anti-aircraft gunners. By 1951, the size of unmanned aircraft had increased, and small piston engines were replaced by jet engines, as in the Ryan Firebee. The Firebee, one of the most popular target drones ever built, flew higher and faster than unmanned aircraft before it, and even made an appearance in the 2003 invasion of Iraq.
During the Cold War, the military became increasingly interested in using drones for surveillance missions, an interest that grew even more after Francis Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane was shot down over Russia in 1960. The U.S. military started a project codenamed Red Wagon to develop a surveillance drone building on the Firebee project. In 1995, the Predator drone was developed, providing a huge leap forward in technology with longer endurance and improved navigation. In early 2001, Predator drones test launched Hellfire missiles and were deployed to the Middle East after 9/11. A larger, more capable version of the Predator came into service in 2007, known as the Reaper. While government drone use has been primarily overseas, unarmed Predator drones have flown within the U.S. borders. U.S. Customs and Border Protection and the FBI have used Predator drones to patrol the Mexican border, along drug interdiction missions, and a variety of other operations.
Over the last 10 years, drone use overseas has skyrocketed, with confirmed strikes in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. While many of these missions have been successful, with very high success rates, there has also been a growing number of controversial strikes. The killing of Anwar al-Awlaki, a U.S. citizen in Yemen, raised questions about the constitutionality of using drones to kill U.S. citizens without due process. Many concerns have also been raised about the secrecy and lack of transparency surrounding the military drone program. There is no public knowledge of any rules for target selection, and the amount of confirmation of the target is under question after drone strikes have killed groups of unarmed civilians. There is great concern that this lack of transparency will transfer to domestic drone use, and that surveillance drones will give Big Brother an eye in the sky, invading our right to privacy.
The computer system that is used to control drones and to watch video feed and data is very weak and insecure. In December 2009, militants in Iraq were able to hack into U.S. drones using only $26 software to intercept live video feed taken by the Predator drones. The software also provided information that was used to avoid U.S. military operations. Later in October 2011, insurgents infected the very complicated computer system with a computer virus that U.S. Predator drones and Reaper drones are controlled with. However, the insurgents were only able to watch video feed that was being recorded by the drones. The virus brought up many security risks within the host-based computer system that is used to control the drones, and the virus had resisted multiple efforts to remove it from the system. The virus may have allowed the insurgents to collect secret data on the drones and transmit it over the public internet. The amount of data and video feed that the virus had allowed insurgents to gather is a drastic amount, considering there are 30 CIA drones that hit 230 targets in Pakistan before October 2011. With many attempts at trying to kill the computer virus, computer technicians were not able to get rid of the virus and eventually had to use a software tool called BC Wipe to erase the internal hard drives in the computer system. Why are drones so advantageous to use in the U.S.?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of implications for using drones. As you know, a technology, it's been evolving for the last like 50 to 60 years. And we've reached a point where we have some incredible advantages using drones compared to manned aircraft. And we've seen most of those advantages and how they're being used internationally right now. And that has raised, I mean, as a technology, it's advantageous. So that raises a lot of implications for how that technology is used in a just and effective way. So if you think about sort of what the real advantages of using drones are, there's a couple of key things to pay attention to. One is the duration. They can be up and recording and monitoring. So you've got drones that are capable of being up for hours upon hours, watching particular areas where they can be high enough in altitude that they can't be seen really, that they can't be tampered with, but at the same time they can get a visual resolution that's capable of seeing a pencil in your pocket, right? That's the level of capability that these drones have and the kind of imagery that they have now. The other implications then that we think about when we start thinking about how would that affect people in the United States starts to deal with the idea that we can monitor people all the time, that we could have 24/7 monitoring of folks without their knowledge, without them being aware of it. If there's anything like the international use where we're actually using weaponized drones could be happening in the United States, then there's that possibility that those could be used to actually engage in lethal activities that could obviously violate the standards, the laws that we have now, as long, if we're assuming we were enforcing them and not defining everyday citizens in the United States as enemy combatants. One of the big concerns that people have is how these drones can be used domestically. And so we know, for instance, that there have been drones used in a variety of ways. They're being used primarily by the federal government at this point through the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. They can be used by immigration services to watch our borders. And we're being told by the government that they don't have weaponized drones that they're using within the borders of the United States. We'll kind of set that issue aside. They obviously, the weaponized drones exist in the United States because we train with them in the United States, we build them in the United States, and then we ship them and deploy them overseas. So it could be used. And part of the issue when we start thinking about that is we don't have very clear policies for how they could be used. Just to go on the idea of when we're talking about using weaponized drones for dealing with a terrorist threat within the United States, the basic principles in play are that, typically speaking, if you are suspected of a crime, then either the FBI or state law enforcement agencies would need to get a warrant, would need to gather evidence, and then need to arrest you on the basis of the evidence that they're gathering or the suspicion that they have for those activities. Now, if you're engaged in an actual act of crime, you're out, killing people, or you're being seen with a bomb or something like that, and you're on your way to a target, they don't need to go and gather a warrant. That's when you pose an imminent threat to the people around you, and so that's where the police can intervene immediately. They don't have to say, it's like, wow, I see that guy with a gun going into a school, I better just sit back and wait to go get a warrant and then come back and see if it's actually a crime. No, they can go and step in. So no one's really concerned about those kinds of issues. So they have a tremendous kind of amount of benefit that could be gained from being able to gather this information. So for instance, if you had an event like the Boston Marathon where there was a bombing a year ago, you could have a drone hovering over that scene the whole time that would be able to then to trace back, if something did happen, what was going on. And so there's some positive capabilities that could emerge from that. Where people start to get really worried is about how the new capabilities of the technology really start to infringe upon what we typically think of as our rights for privacy and our rights not to have unreasonable search and seizure of property. Right? So if you give people the capability to use these drones, whether really small-scale drones that are capable of viewing and listening, or drones that are capable of taking infrared pictures so that they can see what's happening in movement inside of buildings that wouldn't typically be observable, but is still being observed from a public area, then you have a situation where, because of the technology, things that would normally have been unreasonable search and seizure start to become possible to do without any kind of warrant, without any kind of due process being used. And that's where people start to worry about how their rights are going to be infringed upon.
So how vulnerable do you think the computer software system is that is used in drones?
Well, you get a mixed message on that. As you start listening to the kinds of things that the federal government says, the federal government makes the argument that they are safe, that they're very secure. There's been a few instances, though, that tend to belie that kind of stance. One is the argument the Iranians apparently have a crash drone. They said they hacked it and caused it to crash. The federal government kind of denies that, but they are releasing a lot of information on their drone programs, so they're not really, it's not very clear why it crashed or what the reasons for it were. There's also a study I looked at by, I believe it was a team at Stanford, who had as one of their projects in the class hacking a drone as it flew over a building. So they went up on their roof and they hacked into the radio signal, and they were able to take control of the drone away from the pilot. Now, that's probably not using military-grade encryption, but if you take into consideration that any kind of code, any kind of data stream is capable of being hacked, that you have all of these remote-controlled planes out there, there's always going to be the possibility that they could be